Hi everybody, if you're new to this channel, welcome. I'm Jennifer Queen with the Jennifer Queen team and Remax Professionals here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I apologize to all of our loyal followers that I have not been keeping up at all with content on this channel. Completely my bad. You guys have been amazing. And to be honest, business just got really busy as a result of all these YouTube videos, which is amazing and great. You're keeping my team and I busy. But at the same time, I still have to find a way to continue to carve out content because obviously you guys are appreciating it and that means so much to me. This channel actually started because people seem to be asking me the same questions over and over again. So I essentially started recording videos just that I could send to my clients and share with them so that they had a more in-depth answer with well thought out responses. I find a lot of the time when we're meeting, we're talking up front of a house, sometimes in the rain, sometimes in the snow, sometimes those conversations can get a little hurried. So I wanted to shoot a little bit more in-depth topics on all the kinds of questions that you ask. And I have come up with a good list of new questions to continue to talk about. So again, thanks for continuing to watch this channel. I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate all of you and all of the comments and all of the requests. Keep that feedback coming. This is an open loop. You tell me what you want to see more of and we will continue to work on that. So today I want to talk about a more recent piece of legislation that has come into effect in Canada that does have an impact on a lot of the people actually watching this channel, and that is called the foreign buyer ban. Now, if you've listened on the news, there were many politicians talking about this, and essentially what they were trying to take aim at with this foreign buyer ban is to keep Canadian housing more affordable for Canadian residents and permanent residents. Essentially, they're trying to make sure that Canadians are able to purchase homes within their own country. So the foreign buyer ban came into effect in Canada January 1st of 2023. So it's still fairly recent, and to be honest, there's still not a ton of legislation and a ton of clarity on every single rule contained within the ban itself. There's still a lot of gray areas that we are working through. However, here's what you do need to know: the why. Essentially, the why is that what we are seeing is a real shortage of housing in Canada. That was made very evident when interest rates were low and things were selling sky-high prices. If you read the most recent report from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, or CMHC, which is a major underwriter of mortgages here in Canada, well-known, well-trusted source, they are projecting that by the year 2030, we are going to need 3.5 million new homes built from where we're at today. The issue though becomes that currently we're on track with our current trends to build about 1.2 million homes in that period of time. Just with new housing starts and applications and permits going in, that's what we're tracking on trend for at this time. The 3.5 million is simply to meet population growth, whether it be from within Canada or also the positive net migration we're targeting. We're talking about hitting only about 1/3 of what the projections are for what we will actually need to have affordable housing by 2030. I'll be sure to link that article in the comment section below, just in case you're interested in reading a little bit more in detail about what CMHC had to say on the matter. The who. That is the next most important part of this equation. Who is impacted by this? So the legislation spells out some very simple exceptions. If you are a Canadian resident, you are exempt from the foreign buyer ban, of course. If you are a permanent resident, you are also exempt from the foreign buyer ban. Or if you are registered under the Indian Act, you would also have an exemption. So if you meet any of these three criteria, business as usual, buy the houses, go have fun, go shop. However, if you are considered by Canada standards a foreign citizen or a foreign corporation, then there are definitely going to be some restrictions on what you can and cannot buy here in Canada, and specifically to this channel, Winnipeg in general. Of course, like any legislation, there are some exceptions. So I'll go through the more common ones just in case there are situations that might apply to you, and then you might want to dig deeper, investigate a little bit further with perhaps a lawyer or somebody able to give you advice in the matter. First rule, if you are not a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, but you are married to a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, you are exempt from these rules. You and your spouse are still welcome to purchase a home here in Canada. If you are a refugee or somebody with temporary resident status here, you might also be exempt, but there are rules and restrictions. Some of that fine print I have not been able to find yet, even when I asked a lawyer for a specific circumstance for one client. But this is a gray area, just keep that in mind. If you have worked in Canada for a substantial period of time, particularly those that are working towards their permanent residence card, the rule is if you have worked mainly in Canada, filed your tax returns annually for the last 3 out of 4 years, you have a higher chance, but again, no guarantees there. Similar to that, international students might have some exemptions too. The rules state that if you have resided in Canada as a student for the bulk of the year, the last 4 out of 5 years, then you might also be exempt. You can't purchase a house over $500,000, so there would be some restrictions and limitations there, but you might also be able to get an exemption. Also, some members of international organizations or diplomats will have exemptions as well, again, case-by-case basis. Really, there's a variety of other situations that can arise that we really have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis. Unfortunately, the legislation is not clear and it's not perfectly spelled out for us as to what applies and what doesn't apply and where that gray area turns black or white, essentially. So just be sure to always consult with a lawyer to make sure that what you're doing is above board. And of course, you can ask your realtor too if you need either a recommendation for a good lawyer or if you want just a quick overview of what the rules are and what they think in your situation. But ultimately, I think this is going to come down to speaking to lawyers in really tough circumstances. The where. I find it not as clear. So obviously this foreign buyer ban is applicable to Canada, but when I looked at some of the more specific rules, it's not all of Canada, it's not all of Manitoba per se. What they are saying is anything in a major metropolitan area. So if you are in Winnipeg, then we're talking about several surrounding areas. Now they have a map that's considered the greater Winnipeg area, and I took a quick look at it, and it's definitely not just within the perimeter of Winnipeg that is exempt from this. For example, the Winnipeg metropolitan area would be considered as far east as north, as far south as St. Agathe, and as far west as Poplar Point, and then as far north though as Grand Marais. So not necessarily areas that anybody here would consider even part of Winnipeg, but it's considered part of the Winnipeg metropolitan area. So essentially though, what they're saying with those maps is that you can buy, if you're a foreign buyer, outside of those metropolitan areas. So in more rural communities where there's not as much development, the Canadian government says, sure, go ahead, go develop those areas. We don't care, it's not as competitive, and we're not as concerned about affordability in these communities because these communities in general are usually more affordable anyways. And there's less competition for existing residents to try and get into those communities. The when. So I already said it started January 1st, 2023. This is only supposed to be a 2-year policy, conveniently coinciding with the next round of elections. But as of now, we are talking about 2 years, and then this legislation should be repealed. The what? The what is another interesting piece, because essentially what this legislation says is it applies to essentially residential property. So if you're buying a detached house, condo, really vacant land in which you intend to build or develop on, that would all be considered residential. However, where we get outside of what is considered residential property here in Canada is anytime you are buying something that is 4 units or more. So if you're buying a quad, like if you're buying a triplex, that would not apply. That would be considered residential. However, once you go to those quadplexes or bigger multi-units, then those units are actually exempt from this act. You can still buy commercial property here in Canada if you are a commercial buyer. Again, do your legwork up front, do the homework. You do not want to get in a situation in which you're suffering penalties because they're pretty substantial under this legislation. But yeah, in general, it's safe to consider commercial property still. I think that if you were to buy a fourplex, say, and with the intention of living in one unit, renting out the remaining 3, I don't see an issue with that. I have spoken to a lawyer here about that, and they thought that would be well within the rules and not get anybody in trouble. Okay, so I kind of touched upon it already, but we got to talk about what the penalties actually are, because in my opinion, they're very substantial, particularly for your lawyers, your realtors, your lenders. So anybody that assists you in obtaining property, if you are a foreign buyer in these next 2 years, they can be subjected to a $10,000 fine. End of story. It's not up to, they say $10,000, that's the fine. However, for you, the purchaser, the bigger concern actually becomes the property itself that you're buying and how that will impact you. And the answer is, if you are caught buying property in this time, you will be forced to sell that property. And if you've made any profit on that property, it doesn't go to you. It is collected by the government, and you will never see those funds, unfortunately. So there's really no upside for you if you are purchasing here, because you will be forced to go through the whole process of purchasing, then forced to go through the whole process of buying with no upside to you. For us on our team, what that means essentially is we make you fill out one additional form. There were some forms that came out from the Canadian Real Estate Association just to help us confirm whether or not you are a Canadian resident or not. It's a simple 2-page form that we just have you fill out. We're having all buyers fill it out just these couple of years, just to confirm you are a Canadian resident and to make sure you are aware of what penalties you could face in the event you were trying to sneak by. Okay, so I've talked about really the logistics and what this is, but I know a lot of you come on here or you call me and you ask me for my actual opinion. And I am a Canadian resident. I have young clients that are buyers and I want to see them get into homes at affordable prices. However, I do not think this policy is going to benefit anybody long-term at all. I think the policies are incredibly short-sighted, maybe alleviating a little bit of stress on the market right now, but just kicking that can down the road, making it even more difficult a few years from now. Likely when interest rates start to stabilize and come down again, it's going to be just this mess of this buildup of people looking to get into the market, compounding with just the housing shortages I've already mentioned. The ban itself really only attempts to address the symptoms of a problem, but not the underlying root of the problem, which at the end of the day is always going to be a supply and demand issue. We don't have enough supply, we have plenty of demand. So as long as that persists, we are going to see a lack of affordable housing here in Canada. I also see some negative side effects from this. If you've kept an eye on the Winnipeg market, just to see kind of what has been selling, what has been developed in these newer areas, you're going to notice that a lot of the houses being built are actually being built with newcomers to Canada in mind. For example, it is not uncommon now to see spice kitchens being worked into some floor plans, or secondary entrances for people that intend to have multi-generations of a family living within a home. And we're not talking just one development, I'm seeing these in all developments. This is stuff we weren't necessarily seeing many years ago, but this is a builder response to demand. However, what I'm also starting to see are some builders feeling the nervousness about starting new homes, building spec homes. And anytime we start to see that retraction in the market because builders are nervous that their prime buyers are no longer going to be coming here and purchasing these homes, we see that retraction of inventory. We see the lack of confidence from the builders. So we aren't seeing the housing starts, in my opinion, that we should be seeing to meet the demand and forecasts for 2030. You also have to remember that housing is a huge component of GDP. Without getting too deep into the whole economics of it, it is not a good place to be in if you have declining GDP in your country. Another side effect of this plan, in my opinion, is that it's going to have a negative impact on businesses here that are looking to attract and retain new employees. The Canadian dream is not to rent. The Canadian dream is to own a piece of the land here and build your life here. How are we supposed to attract people to jobs which we are already having a hard time filling positions within if we can't encourage people to come here and live that Canadian dream. I can also see a decrease in foreign investment in Canada as a result of these new policies too. And unfortunately, I think an even bigger bubble 2 years from now. You never want to create housing bubbles. Honestly, the best kind of market, in my opinion, is one that's predictable, balanced, steady, which is what we normally do have here in Winnipeg. In fact, it would be equated to a boring real estate cycle here, in that our property values have kind of just always gone up, but at a slow trajectory. When others were experiencing recessions in 2007, 2008, here we were just kind of climbing slowly. Those were actually some of our better years here for investment too. And we just continue to see growth in the market here consistently year over year. However, I think in 2 years, perhaps not that many, but there will be a buildup of foreign buyers looking to buy. A lot of the time I do find that people moving here like to rent for the first couple of years until they get a sense of what the city is about, where they want to reside within it, where they're comfortable. However, we already have those people that have been here looking to buy now, and it's just going to cause an increase in purchasers to the market 2 years from now. It's not all bad news. However, I do think that the people profiting the most from these policies are those that know how to take advantage of a situation. For example, has anybody else noticed that rental amounts are also going up in the same period? We're seeing rent prices go up in Winnipeg on average around 8%. However, we're seeing even more than that in some neighborhoods. And if you think about it, absolutely, as a Canadian resident, why not go buy property to rent out to these individuals who now no longer can purchase here? They are going to need housing, but there's also a shortage of housing even in the rental space. So there's going to be people coming out ahead in terms of making smart investment decisions, and I can't blame them, to be honest. I also think though that there's an opportunity for foreign buyers to also take advantage of this market. Perhaps instead of buying a single family residential home like you originally planned to do when you moved to Canada, look into buying that fourplex. There is no harm in your first building that you are residing in to be a fourplex. In fact, it's a great way to catapult you to future real estate wealth. If I could do it all over again, my first home probably would have been a duplex or a triplex instead of buying single family residential, because how that could have catapulted me forward on future purchases would have been very different from buying residential property. In conclusion though, my opinion on this is that it was purely political theater. I hate to say that. I don't like to say that. I don't like to talk politics on this channel, but you guys have asked about my take on it, and I just don't think there was a lot of thought put into it. For example, when did all this legislation come out? Right before Christmas. Nobody could answer questions. We were wanting to figure out who this applied to, which clients we should try and get into houses before December 31 of 2022. And there was nobody to answer those questions. It was poorly executed. The legislation, I think, didn't actually come out until December 20th. We had just heard that there was going to be this new legislation coming, but no actual documentation until at least mid-December. I also think it is convenient that this foreign buyer ban is going to be up just before the next elections, in time for everybody to pat themselves on the back and say, hey, look at what we did for you. We prevented foreign buyers to make housing more affordable for our own residents. But again, I don't think it's helping. I think it's just political theater. However, if the Canadian government was truly concerned, and concerned beyond election timelines and what can be accomplished in short periods of time, and looking long-term instead, if the Canadian government wants to really tackle this issue, the issue being the underlying shortage of affordable housing for Canadian residents, they've got to switch tracks. They've got to think more long-term. They have to think about policies that will actually benefit beyond a political cycle. And essentially that has to go to addressing the lack of supply. So how do you get more supply? You offer incentives to builders to build more homes, but build more affordable homes, perhaps make it easier for zoning and development. A lot of the red tape that people go through in the construction process adds months and months to the actual construction cycle. If you go to any new development here in Winnipeg, what you're going to notice is that there are houses under construction, but perhaps sitting empty or at various stages without work being done to them. And a lot of that is to do with delays in inspections, delays in permitting, delays in proper infrastructure going in. So anytime we can expedite that process and make it easier for people to build, I think that is a huge benefit and a quicker way to get to the finished product and be able to build more for this demand. Now, don't get me wrong here. I still think that inspections, proper inspections, having proper codes in place to keep people safe is important. I just think we can do better than what we're currently doing. It's a very inefficient, slow red tape process just to build a house here. Part of the problem with ideas like this is that they do take a long time to enact. It's not a quick fix to completely change the permitting process or any processes like that. However, we need some long-sighted politicians in play that see that this might be years and years in the making. It's just not the quick fix that politicians are looking for. However, at the end of the day, we need to address the core issues, not the symptoms from the issues. So that's my take. Sorry it's a little strong, and I'm again apologetic that I got a little political on here. This will be my last time, at least for a while. Again, thank you so much for watching. I'm sure I rambled on longer than I should have once again. I'm Jennifer Queen with the Jennifer Queen team and RE/MAX Professionals here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And be sure, if you have other questions about the market here, to hit me up in the comments section below. I am always happy to answer your questions, and if you have that question, it's quite likely that somebody else does too. So never be shy, ask all your questions. I'm happy to answer them or just send you information offline too. So thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to subscribe so you see our upcoming videos.